You ever fought off a flock of werebats? It's not fun, let me tell you. Hang on a second. Sorry about that. Where were we? Right. There was an interruption in the release of annual direct-to-video Scooby movies in 2002, largely due to the theatrical, then home video release of the first live-action Scooby-Doo movie. The next film was produced in 2002, but wouldn't see release until 2003. Scooby-Doo and the Legend of the Vampire basically upended everything the first 4 films had established. Since then, I've held the suspicion that whoever's in charge of the Scooby franchise, at least as far as these movies go, is adamant that the gang always be teenagers and the monsters are never real. This has led to several confusing elements in these movies, but we'll get into that as we need to. The script for this movie was once again written by Mark Turose and directed by Scott Geralds. This movie heralds a new art style, eschewing the darker color scheme of the previous movies and going for a flatter, brighter, and less detailed look, which would continue through the next 8 movies. Additionally, there was another shakeup to the voice cast. With the departure of the previous production team, it was apparently decided that making Shaggy a vegetarian wasn't that much of a deal breaker for the new team, thus securing the return of Casey Kasem as Shaggy. But he wasn't the only one who returned. For reasons which I've been unable to identify, in addition to Kasem, Heather North Kenny and Nicole Jaffe, who had played Daphne and Velma in the past, were also brought back to reprise their roles. Jaffe had played Velma from 1970 to 1973, and North Kenny had played Daphne from 1970 until the end of The 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo in 1986. As mentioned, Don Messick, the original voice of Scooby, had passed away in 1997, so this movie marks Frank Welker's assuming duties as Scooby's voice for the first time. So, basically, this movie is a throwback in almost every sense of the word. Original cast, original character designs, and total disregard for the various updates and changes made in the previous movies. With all that, does Scooby-Doo and the Legend of the Vampire even compare to what came before it? Well, let's find out. We opened at a sound check at Vampire Rock in Australia, where the Vampire Rock Music Festival is being held. Manager Daniel Illawarra, played by Phil Lamar, is excited for the show, but his grandfather Malcolm, played by Kevin Michael Richardson, isn't so sure the festival's a good idea. His concerns seem to be warranted when a mist appears, revealing the Yowie Yahoo, a giant vampire, and 3 regular-sized vampires that appear to do its bidding. From here, we go to a cruise ship where we see the gang, once again in their classic outfits, being menaced by a trio of monsters. This is also where the movie decides to do a slightly updated version of the intro sequence to Scooby-Doo, Where Are You?, complete with what will be the second to last time we hear the theme song in these movies.
Where are you? Got some work to do now. Scooby-Dooby-Doo, where are you? We need some help from you now.
The gang arrive in Australia, where basically the movie confirms that it largely doesn't care what happened in the previous ones.
No vacation would be complete without the Mystery Machine.
I don't even want to know how much it cost Fred to have that damn van shipped in the cargo hold. Another interesting note, if you listen to the incidental music, you'll discover it's largely made up of remixed music cues from throughout the early seasons of the TV show, once again sending the message that we're going back to basics here. The gang do some sightseeing in Sydney and hit the beach, where we get assorted educational facts from Velma and more of the on-again, off-again Fred and Daphne romance. The gang decides to explore the outback, and Fred points out an advertisement for the music festival. Shaggy and Scooby naturally don't want anything to do with anything involving vampires.
There's no such thing as vampires.
No, of course not. Just, sentient computer viruses, alien beings, ghosts of 16th century witches, cat people, and zombies. Okay, enough of the sarcasm involving the other movies so far. I said originally that continuity really doesn't matter here, and it doesn't. Anyway, the promise of the concession stands at the festival gets the boys on board, and we go back to Vampire Rock, where the rules of the contest are getting laid down.
The rules of the contest are very simple. It's for unsigned bands, no one can enter more than once, and as I've told you again and again, each contestant only gets 3 minutes.
This is Russell, Daniel's partner, and he's talking to music manager Jasper Ridgway. Jasper is trying to convince Russell to bend the rules for his band, the Bad Omens, but when Russell won't budge, Jasper gets pissy.
I didn't have to come back here. Especially after what happened to Wild Wind last year.
Wild Wind was a rock band who disappeared at the previous year's festival, and rumors persisted that the Yowie Yahoo has turned them into vampires. As Russell points out, the 3 vampires from the night before bear a striking resemblance to the members of Wild Wind. They consider canceling the festival but decide against it, in spite of the kidnapping of singer Matt Marvelous the night before. Meanwhile, the gang have several adventures in the outback. The gang arrive at Vampire Rock and are perplexed that there aren't more people there. As they head toward the rock, Shaggy and Scooby soon find out why. But no sooner do they tell the gang than the vampire vanishes, and they find the glowing eyes in the trees that Scooby spotted, but some passing dingoes chase them off. And then the gang hears something familiar.
Do you guys hear that?
I'm a Hex Girl, and I'm gonna
Hey, the Hex Girls!
Yeah, again, massive continuity snarl here. In fact, this isn't the only one we've seen. This happened earlier in the movie.
There's the Scooby Snacks.
Considering Turaz wrote the last movie, there's no way that this isn't a callback. So yeah, now is when things start getting messy in terms of what did and didn't happen in relation to the previous movies. In and of this movie by itself, it's not that big of a deal. It can still work in terms of continuity with the previous 4. I mean, we have no real indicators the gang aren't still in their 20s here. It's going to be later in these movies where it'll become an issue to the point that we're just going to have to throw continuity out the window. And speaking of issues, is it just me or did they change Luna's skin tone here? She was pretty explicitly black in Witch's Ghost, but here? Yeah, I don't know, her skin just seems to be a bit too light, although admittedly that could be due to the change of art and color palette. I felt I should say something about it anyway. The gang asks if the Hex Girls have seen anything unusual during the couple of days they've been here, but before they can say anything, Daniel and Russell show up. They get introduced to the gang and state that the finalists in the unsigned band competition are disappearing. As a result, bands are dropping out of the festival left and right. Malcolm shows up and tells off Daniel for going ahead with the festival.
Like, who was that spooky old man?
That was my grandfather.
Oh, I meant spooky in a good way.
Russell and Daniel tell the gang about the disappearance of Wild Wind. The band had only finished 3rd in the previous year's contest, then they went to camp in Vampire Rock and vanished. But that's not the only weird thing that's happened over the last year.
Past few months, there've been a lot of strange lights and sounds coming from up there.
The gang decide to investigate by setting themselves up as a band in the contest with the hope that the vampires will target them next. When they try to put some form of an act together on stage, Daphne finds some stage makeup smeared on one of the lights.
Like Matt Marvelous was a musician.
Even so, I doubt he'd wear this color. It's glowing white.
Fred also finds a footprint on stage from a hiking boot and discovers something else that's weird.
The print is sticky like glue, but it's not glue exactly. I don't know what it is.
Jasper shows up with the Bad Omens, who basically mock the gang and tell them to get off the stage. Velma asks Jasper about Wild Wind, and Jasper confirms he used to manage them until their disappearance, but refuses to go into any more detail. He also lets something else slip.
Camping. How primitive. I choose to travel in a fully furnished air-conditioned trailer.
While the Bad Omens set up, the gang gets changed and go clue hunting. Fred theorizes that Jasper might be behind the vampires, with the Bad Omens showing up in costume to scare off the competition.
Jasper Ridgway seems like the kind of guy who'd do anything to have his band win.
Since the stage makeup with the Bad Omens used looks similar to the stuff Daphne found, the gang, of course, split up. With Fred, Velma, and Daphne going to talk to Daniel and Russell to find out more about the Bad Omens and take a look at Jasper's trailer, and Scooby and Shaggy looking for clues around the festival area, which the boys pretty much interpret to mean raiding the concession stands. At Jasper's trailer, Fred comes up with a plan to get Jasper out of the trailer so they can search it.
Now, Daphne, I want you to disguise yourself as an Aboriginal medicine woman and...
Fred!
What?
Jesus, Fred, let's just tap dance on the racism line, shall we? Good grief. Jasper's trailer is decked out in 70s kitsch, which the gang comment on.
Seems like Jasper can't let go of the past.
Much like whoever's in charge of this franchise. Anyway, Velma finds a costume that looks like it belonged to one of the members of Wild Wind, and Fred finds costumes for the other 2 members as well. Meanwhile, back at the concession stand, Shaggy and Scooby start the chase.
Take it away, what can you do when the spooky goods are coming for you?
In addition to giving us another kick-ass song, this chase actually does do more than just throw random gags and padding at us. Throughout it, Shaggy and Scooby try a couple of standard anti-vampire tactics like garlic, and even simulated sunlight with some tanning beds, but interestingly, neither seem to have any effect. What's even more interesting is when Shaggy and Scooby run onto the stage where the Bad Omens are rehearsing, the Yowie Yahoo shows up and abducts the band, thus seeming to shoot one massive hole in Fred and Velma's theory. Daniel and Jasper show up to see what happened, and Jasper does not take the disappearance of his band well.
My band is gone. What are we going to do?
Fred suggests getting everyone who's still around together and camp in one place with someone on watch. Daniel states Russell already went home along with the rest of the staff, leaving only them and the Hex Girls left at the festival grounds. Shaggy and Scooby, after the usual negotiations, take the first watch. Naturally, they fall asleep on the job, but are awakened by what they think are the vampires, but turn out to be a couple of motorcyclists. They turn out to be a band Russell booked, two skinny dudes. It turns out they've been around for a while, exploring and camping inside Vampire Rock. When they get word that the other acts have been kidnapped or gone back to Sydney, they ask if they've won by default.
We had a last-minute entry.
Dawn breaks, and the gang, along with Daniel, head out looking for the missing musicians. Daniel's just talking to his grandfather since he knows all the local legends, especially about the Yowie Yahoo. They find Malcolm sending smoke signals.
There's a tribal council meeting later today. I'm letting the others know.
Fred comments that the smoke has a pleasant aroma, and Malcolm reveals he's burning the flowers of the red gum tree. Scooby takes a whiff, but finds himself stuck thanks to the tree's sap. Later, the gang head upriver with Malcolm to the tribal council meeting, where Malcolm offers advice on how to deal with the Yowie Yahoo.
According to legend, the only thing that can destroy a vampire is sunlight. It's believed they also fear the dingo.
Daniel tells the gang he's scheduled them to perform right after the Hex Girls that night. And speaking of, who's ready for another new song by the Hex Girls? As the Hex Girls play with the gang looking on, the Yowie Yahoo reappears along with Wild Wind and abducts the Hex Girls before the gang can do anything to stop them. Daniel buys some time with the crowd and wonders where Russell is so they can cancel the show. Fred, however, has other ideas.
I've got a plan that will end this once and for all.
The gang head to Vampire Rock to search for the Hex Girls, splitting up in the usual fashion. Daphne finds a secret entrance into the rock itself. Meanwhile, Shaggy and Scooby get menaced by dingoes. Inside the rock, Fred, Velma, and Daphne continue to explore, and Velma notices something odd.
Right now, we should be experiencing total cave darkness. But we're not.
They find the light source and come out in a cavern filled with stage equipment and lit lanterns. Velma points out that the lanterns didn't light themselves. They also find the equipment is still warm, indicating it's been used recently. Daphne finds another light source and a secret door which reveals it to be some kind of living quarters, as well as another unpleasant surprise. The vampire chases Daphne through another series of tunnels, which come out on a cliff edge overlooking a pond. With nowhere else to go, Daphne dives off the ledge into the water. It just so happens said pond is right next to where Scooby and Shaggy are trapped by the dingoes. Daphne's cannonball into the pond soaks all of them, scaring the dingoes off.
That's a 10.
Thanks, guys.
Meanwhile, Fred and Velma find the hidden living quarters and start looking for Daphne, and since this entire movie is a throwback to the usual Scooby-Doo formula, it means it's time for Velma to lose her glasses.
Thanks, Freddy. I was getting worried.
Velma makes a break for it and crashes into Fred, and both of them are chased by the vampires and off the same cliff, but they're nowhere near safe yet. What follows is actually a pretty decent action sequence with the Yowie Yahoo attacking the gang with everything from fireballs to high winds to some kind of sonic attack. The gang can't do much except try to hide from the vampires, but much like before, the dingoes arrive and scare the vampires off. The Yowie Yahoo continues to menace the gang, but the sun starts to rise and reflects off Scooby's dog tag. This has an interesting effect. However, even though the Yowie Yahoo's gone, the gang still has a small problem.
Quick, over the bridge! Don't worry, gang, I've got you!
The vampires chase the gang in broad daylight and over running water, which vampire lore says shouldn't happen. Fortunately, by chasing the gang, they've run right into Fred's trap. And of course, they aren't real vampires. They actually are...
We'll all be two skinny dudes.
Although, for once, the bad guys do the smart thing.
Nobody say anything.
Well, if a confession's not coming, the gang's more than happy to fill in the blanks, starting with the fact that the two skinny dudes and Russell aren't who they claim to be.
Ask them yourself.
What the?
Okay, like now I'm really confused.
It's called a double bluff. What we have here is Wildwind the band pretending to be three other people pretending to be Wildwind the vampires. Because otherwise this reveal would be considered a total ass pull. This way, it's still a total ass pull, but at least some thought was put into it. The band decided to pull a disappearing act after the last festival as a publicity stunt and make a triumphant return the next year, but the rules of the contest stated they couldn't enter again, at least not as Wildwind. So they came up with the two skinny dudes idea, and one of them went undercover as Russell. The plan? Kidnap or scare off the competition so two skinny dudes could win by default, then at the final performance make their triumphant return as Wildwind. Yes, even for Scooby-Doo, this is a ridiculously convoluted plan. And as for the bands...
We sent them and Matt Marvelous on diving trips to the Great Barrier Reef. All expenses paid. They were thrilled.
Because that's going to guarantee nobody will talk about this ludicrous scheme. Anyway, they kidnapped the Hex Girls in order to draw out the gang and send them packing as well. As for the Hex Girls themselves, they refused the free trip, so they got dumped in the outback. Fortunately, Malcolm found them and brought them back to the festival. Which only leaves the actual supernatural stuff. First off, the band used climbing gear to simulate flying, covering up the ropes with smoke, also from the red gum tree, which explained the footprint Fred found. As for the Yowie Yahoo, it's a standard Scooby-Doo standby, projected holograms plus other assorted special effects. And because it was a hologram, direct light shining on it made the hologram disappear. So that's the mystery solved, but there's one other thing.
That makes you guys the winner.
Does that mean what I think it means?
Oh yeah. Brace yourselves, here we go.
So we got a mystery to solve. Scooby-Doo, be ready for your eyes. Don't hold back. Scooby-Doo, if you come through, you're gonna have yourself a Scooby snack. That's a dragon.
Damn, Velma's got some pipes on her. In all honesty, Scooby-Doo and the Legend of the Vampire is pretty decent as far as these movies go. Yeah, it's kind of disappointing that it's pretty much abandoned the idea of monsters being real in any capacity, but taken on its own, it serves pretty well as a classic-style Scooby story. The original voice cast sounds like they haven't missed a beat in the 30 years since they were all last working together, and it's nice to hear them again. The animation, however, isn't exactly as exciting or detailed as the previous films, and the colors just look really flat. I don't know if the budget was cut for this movie or not. The original songs are pretty good, while the remix of the classic Scooby-Doo music cues are interesting, if retreading familiar ground. Where it suffers, though, is the plot. This entire story could have easily been told in 30 to 45 minutes, and there is a ton of padding to drive this thing up to its 71-minute runtime. The solution to the mystery is preposterous, even by Scooby-Doo standards, and outside of seeing the Hex Girls again, none of the supporting characters are all that memorable. It's serviceable, but it feels like the script could have used a couple more passes. Overall, though, if you like the original series and want to see a moderately updated take on the formula, this one will serve you pretty well. And so, it's time to drive a stake into another of the 30-plus films of Scooby-Doo.
Scooby-Dooby-Doo!
Here come those meddling kids to join the chase. No creep can keep them away.